Moving on from that, we're going to go into children's voices. And what I want to do here is just ask you to think a bit more about this notion of restorative practices. Because one of the things that we've done in terms of majoring on the importance of the voice and influence of children's voices is through our investment in restorative approaches. So a significant number of young people across the City of Leeds have been trained in restorative processes, restorative practices. And the idea behind that is, if you're thinking about a growth strategy for the city, then why wouldn't you want to invest in some sort of human development, growth development, emotional intelligence of the next generation? So their ability to have mature conversations and make mature connections with each other, with other adults, with their local communities, because then they become the adults of the future. They'll take those skills with them. And then you start to potentially reshape what some of those communities might feel like, what the rest of the city might feel like. It's a wonderful story. When I was in Hull, I was Director of Children's Services in Hull before I came to Leeds. We started to explore this idea of restorative approaches in one particular primary school in Hull called Collingwood Primary School. And we got to the point where the kids who left Collingwood and went on to their transitioned into their secondary accommodation, careful how to phrase it, but kicked up a bit of a fuss when they got to the secondary school, because they weren't implementing restorative practices. So they want to know, where's our circle time? Why are we resolving things this way? We should be resolving things face to face in conversations about this, that, and the other. And that just forced that school to start to think differently. So it does spread. In Leeds, we had because of what we'd learned in Hull, we were able to bring in another what-if scenario. Well, what if we started to roll out this idea of a restorative approach? High support, high challenge, doing things with people, not doing things to them, for them, or doing nothing at all. And as much of that being about us as the leadership team or the members of the state organisations and the partnership, as much as staff working with children and families on the front line. It's as much how we behave with each other as it is about what happens on the front line. Because we put schools at the heart of local communities, we invested heavily in restorative approaches going into some of those schools. It's not perfect yet, it's not across all 276 schools across Leeds, but we're getting there. And this is one story. This is one of our early adopters, one of the first followers, if you like, in that particular sense. So this is a film from a school called Carr Manor, and it's a combination of adults and children talking about, and parents actually talking about restorative practices. So I think let's start getting you to have a set of conversations, because the whole idea, or the centrality of children at the heart of the growth strategy, is entirely dependent on how serious you are about the voice and the influence that voice has amongst children and young people themselves. So we set about a conscious investment to make sure we had something called a voice and influence team. It's only 3 or 4 people. It's a very small service, but it's something that helps us just keep things ticking over in terms of voice and influence of children and young people themselves. I talked to you earlier on about those structures we've got in terms of children's mayor, youth parliament, etc., etc., etc. But the most important bit is, how do you actively engage with children and young people within local community settings? So there's things you can do within individual casework settings when you're working one-to-one with a child that you might want to talk about. There's things that you can do in small groups, like I've just talked about care leavers as a particular group. You might want to do things around that. But fundamentally, how do you now go about engaging, listening to and responding to the voice and influence of children and young people themselves? And how would you want to do that? How would you see that developing so that they have an active say in the development of South Australia, basically, but in anything that's done to them, so that nothing should happen to a child or a young person in terms of an intervention or the state getting involved in their lives without them having the opportunity to have a voice and an influence about what happens. The two, I keep using the words voice and influence together because that was the strongest message we got from children in Leeds, that we were actually not bad at all at asking them. We were pretty good at asking them. In fact, some of them would say we asked them too much, because the real problem was we never did anything with it, and it never had any influence whatsoever. And what they passionately wanted, we want a voice, we absolutely want a voice, but we want our voice to have an influence on our city, We want our voice to have an influence on our city. So if you could think about the good stuff that you're doing, think about the practice. You might want to think individual case level groups or within communities. Just to recap what I was saying, this whole idea of a restorative approach, and I'm going to show you an example of a particular school in Leeds that took the opportunity of trying to embrace that approach very early on when we first started the work around 2010. And there's a film here with children and adults to explain it. And I've just picked one of the questions up, which says, how do you integrate child-led practice into the traditional school classroom teaching? Here's a film to show you.
I think restorative practice is all about a way of moving forward from a situation and a way of resolving a problem that you wouldn't normally resolve.
We've been working a lot on relationships between members of the school community for many years now, and working out different mechanisms by which we can get to know each other well and we can support each other in our work.
When the person at this end gets the communication, you pick up that sponge ball. Here we go.
If you're going to introduce restorative practices into a school, then you also need to be working with everybody in the school, including the kids. Otherwise, it's like playing a game where only one person has all of the rules. What we need to do is give young people the same messages as we give them to the staff and we give them to other agencies.
It's important that the students pick up the RP principles as soon as they come into Carr Manor. So as soon as they're in Year 7, that they learn how to facilitate or work out, resolve issues with each other that they've had with each other. We've obviously trained up Year 7 reps as well to be involved so that they can work with their peers and come together to resolve issues that have come up between them and other peers. And they often understand it a lot better than members of staff would.
Restorative practice is about resolving situations, and if situations are more easily resolved, then there's less of an issue with behaviour.
It helps a lot with minor conflicts with pupils. Had a couple that I did actually in a class, did a circle, and then afterwards took a couple of pupils who were having problems with each other out of the class, and we used RP to get them to have a better relationship and actually build a relationship in the first place.
I'd like to just take a seat, both of you, please. Thank you very much indeed.
In a friendship group, you kind of feel like you don't want to say something to upset the person.
All three of us are here to discuss an incident which has happened earlier on this morning in the classroom.
With restorative practice, you kind of let your feelings out and the other person let their feelings out, and you kind of listen to both sides of the story and you kind of see where your friend is coming from, because I think without restorative practice, a lot of feelings do get left inside and feel like, oh, because he or she is my friend, I can't let my feelings out to them, they might get mad at me or whatever. It's a way of being in a calm environment and talking to the person who's affected and the way you're feeling and expressing your emotions to the person so they can understand your point of view and you can understand their point of view, and it's just a way of bringing harmony to everyone and just getting on together as one.
Okay.
Restorative practices has given us an explicit language under which we can work and some methods by which we can do that work effectively and consistently across the school.
As a parent, it's had a really good effect. My two daughters go here at the Carr Manor. I was also really interested in restorative practice, and I was actually invited in to see a session in school. I think it's just a great tool that can be used with parents, carers, and with the young people themselves. And just that ability to say, let's have a look at this card, let's have a look at these questions, is a very powerful thing, rather than where do we start now. Hopefully it'll be used around the dinner table as it is in a school situation, and I think that's one of the powers of restorative practice.
The question sort of makes you reflect on your behaviour and how you've affected other people, not just yourself, but everyone that was involved, even though you might think you didn't do like a big harm to the person, but listening to their side of the story can sort of make you think, would I like it if someone did that to me? And make you think twice of whether you want to do that again next time.
One particular incident where we used it was to deal with the issue of bullying in the class. Everyone had a chance to have their say, and everyone had a chance to really express how people's comments, how other people in the class were making them feel. And since then, the pupils have really been different towards each other. They've really actually understood and recognised what the comments that they were making, and we're now at a more harmonious stage in the lessons where they think before they say.
Some people I heard before may think it's an easy option, but actually it's a really good way for people to challenge and support without being confrontational.
Sometimes the student gets misunderstood by the way he reacts or they react to the situation.
If people don't get their say, then usually people will then get upset and they then decide that it's not worth trying to resolve issues, and that's never the right way to go about it.
If you don't sit down and speak, we'll just be going in a circle really. We'll be outside school fighting the next day, we'll be shouting at each one, it'll keep on going around, the words will get spread.
If you only listen to the person that's being affected, it's like you don't know why they got affected or why the other person did it.
You often get when a teacher and a student disagree, it always seems that it's always the student's fault.
If they talk about it like in a civil way rather than just like the teacher saying, I'm the teacher, so what I say goes, and you're going out of the class. If like they're willing to listen, people who might behave badly might be more, they might like comply more and like just kind of not be as bad if the teachers are more willing to work with them.
I think it makes it a lot more cohesive climate, and it makes it actually a less stressful place to work.
Because I work with a lot of the transition classes, we use it quite a lot during lessons. Sometimes it's to start a lesson just to make sure everybody's calm. Sometimes it's to finish a lesson off and to use it in terms of a plenary, making sure that everybody's understand the learning. There are certain classes that it's worked very effectively with, because what it's done, it's allowed them to understand the importance of listening to people and not actually interrupting other people whilst they're having a conversation. So being able to use a talking piece, to take turns, to go around in a sequential circle, and to wait until it's their time. It allows them to think before they speak, so you get clearer answers a lot of the time, and it's really nice to see the children all focusing and giving people a quality audience and listening very carefully to what other people have to say, to then come back to be able to respond to it.
The way that staff have responded to training is really positively so far. I've developed some nice relationships with staff around this and other schools where we've done training, and some really good feedback about how they're putting bits of it into practice through coaching, teaching and learning, and many other aspects of school life.
We have something at Carr Manor High School called coaching, and in our coaching session the other children actually used it to talk the child who was struggling in English, to support him and give him ideas as to how to improve his behaviour. And lo and behold, the next day he acted upon their advice, which was to turn up on time, not to say anything, and to get on with his work. And he stayed for the whole lesson and did not need to be removed, and was very successful.
We use circle times a lot in coaching because, like, say when two groups join together, you might not really know people as that well in that other coaching group, and it helps you communicate, think, giving you a lot of ideas.
We're beginning to see the impact both in relationships between people but also in the performance in the classroom. So what we're expecting to see is restorative practice coming across the whole school community in the way that people work together and in the way that we raise standards and expectations. And we can see that coming already, and we've seen that over a number of years, but I think we can accelerate that.
when they leave high school, it's going to be a skill that they're going to take with them to their workplace or wherever they go to. So if you come into a situation that you don't know how to resolve it, they might think, RP, I did it in high school, let me try this on this person, let's see how it works out. So it will be a very harmonized city, and everyone will just get on a lot better than they do now. And yeah, it'll just be a really, really nice city to be in.
Hopefully that made sense. So that beautiful quote at the end from Temi, it'd just be a really nice, people would just get on and it'd be a really nice place to live, which is a fantastic quote, I think, really. Just think about the fact that when we said we put schools at the heart of local communities, children only spend 15% of their time in school, 85% outside of school. But what happens in the 85% massively impacts on what can happen in the 15%. That's why schools need to be engaged in this agenda. That's why you need schools at the heart of local communities as well. And the whole idea behind that restorative approach was, and the interesting thing was the look of surprise on the adult's face when we said this means you as well. So you often think it's something that we're going to do and something we're going to do with children and make them work restoratively. But actually it's got to be the whole environment. So it's the same in our organisation in terms of children's services. It's the same for me, how I behave, how the leadership team behaves, how the staff in the various offices behave, as much as it is the staff on the front line. So it's something that has to be across the whole organisation and has to run deep. And you're tested on it because people will check you out, and particularly children will check you out as to why are you asking us to do this if you're not willing to do this. So think about it in those terms. Should we go through the questions? Some of the questions that are here. Hopefully, it's answered some of the questions that have come out in terms of how does it work in schools, etc., and how do we integrate practice on that basis. There's a couple of questions about how do you know that children's voice, or how do children know that their voice has been heard? And I suppose part of that is by disproportionately moving towards a position where voice and influence is important, so that whether it's an individual casework conversation, whether it's group work conversation, whether it's in a school setting, children's centres, youth work, anything that happens across the city where there's an engagement point with children, there is an expectation that their views, their voice, their feedback is sought, as well as running alongside, as I said earlier, those traditional structures of a children's mayor, youth parliament, youth council, schools council, etc., that runs in parallel to the adult democratic processes that you'd expect as well. And I suppose you're trying to get to a position where all the adults in the city, if they're engaging with children and young people, are seeking out their voice and allowing their voice to have influence. So whether that's the GP, whether that's the health visitor, whether that's the youth worker, whether that's the social worker, whether that's the voluntary sector, etc., it doesn't matter, because it should just be part and parcel of what we're trying to get. Have we got there yet? Probably not in total, but more and more that expectation's there. And making sure that children realise that the expectation is that we want to hear their voice, and they have every opportunity to let us hear their voice. The thing you have to be ready for, though, is they're not shy in coming forward. So they might tell you things you don't particularly want to hear. They might tell you them in ways you particularly don't want to hear. But if the deal is that we're interested and we're going to do something with what you're telling us, then you've got to be prepared to get into those conversations. We have something in Leeds called Takeover Day, where children and young people in Leeds take over the running of most of the major organisations. It's a national takeover day run by the Children's Commissioner in the UK. So somebody takes over my job, somebody takes over the leadership team, somebody will take over running local businesses where they shadow somebody, somebody takes over the local radio station, all children take over the day-to-day running of the city. Those sort of things become quite symbolic and quite powerful in terms of bringing alive that idea of voice and influence. The local media, the local paper, as part of being a child-friendly Leeds ambassador, they still give us a hard time now and again about various issues, as local papers do. But they are a child-friendly Leeds ambassador, and they promote the good news stories. And on a city the size of Leeds, we've got good news stories every day, and coming out from schools, from children. The paper were kind enough, and they've now given over 2 pages a week in the paper that are run by children. They're the editors, and they run them as part of the process where they go into the paper and they get coaching and mentoring from the senior staff in the paper. They become the young journalists. We've got young reporters that roam around the city, and we wheel out at various times at various events. I'm laughing because Leeds hosted the BBC Sports Personality of the Year one year, and we managed to get Child-Friendly Leeds reporters, a whole team of kids interviewing all the big stars as they rolled up to Leeds Arena. And there's a guy who you may know, a guy called Ben Ainsley, who won loads of gold medals for sailing. Okay, and one of these little reporters went up to see Ben Ainsley and said, "So, do you like boats?" I thought it was just a great question. He was doubled up for ages. But that whole idea of getting children's voice out front and centre. So let's have a look at what consultation occurred with children during the development of the plan. Quite a lot. And we used our youth services, and we used our outreach workers, and we used targeted workers, but we also used social workers and others in those day-to-day conversations where they were with families or with children to just try. Was it absolutely comprehensive? Probably not, but we did as best we could at the time, and there was an open forum for people to bring those conversations back. And we used lots of social media type stuff as well to get people's views. The kids actually gave quite a lot of feedback about the outcomes in particular, and that's where the fun one came from. And the voice, we had voice in to start with, but they wanted influence attached to voice as well, so that went in on that basis. And they helped negotiate the thumb. There was a lot of feedback from children about the thumb being a symbol that they went with. What we also thought, this was a really interesting bit of feedback, we were a bit worried that if we went for child-friendly city, this is how adults' brains work, if we went for child-friendly city, we might upset young people. They don't want to be seen as children. So we asked them, and the feedback was, no, we get this. If you're a child-friendly city, if you get it right for the little kids, you're going to get it right for us. So if you're a child-friendly city, you're a young people-friendly city, you're a family-friendly city, you're a business-friendly city, etc., etc., etc. So that was quite interesting in itself. If we'd stuck with our paranoia, we might have been a child and young people-friendly city, and then it doesn't quite work because we're trying to take a view. If you ask people, they'll help you work out those issues. Children and young people are actively involved in all our budgeting conversations now. We have a regular consultation process about spend and the priorities of spend, and where some of those difficult decisions that we have to make about expenditure. So there's an advisory battery gone. Spending money wisely, budgets, right? Okay, so putting children in charge of some of the budget decisions, advising elected members, politicians on expenditure. Doesn't mean they've got the deciding voice, but they have a voice. There's nobody recruited to a post in children's services in Leeds without children and young people being actively involved in that recruitment process in some way, shape or form. You may have similar opportunities here as well. So there's a whole raft. Once you start somewhere, it'll take you everywhere else, and the logic starts to get you into a whole raft of things moving forward. Safe spaces for children and young people to speak up honestly and for people to act on those needs, wants and hopes. I think that's quite important to create different lines, different ways of communication and not just go for the traditional. So, the worst thing is the survey. Now, the kids don't mind surveys, but they don't want them longer than 1 page is the general feedback that we've had. But, various helplines, various contacts. Social media works really well. The active texting in old currency, but just direct contact with their social worker in a slightly different way, perhaps. When we were working with care leavers, and we got to that conversation about loneliness with care leavers, that led us into the production of an app that care leavers helped co-produce and have helped design. Which is what they wanted, something that was particular for them, because what they didn't want was any great big thing with a big label on it that they had to carry around with them, that they were being consulted on in different ways, but they wanted something that was active and allowed them to connect up with others, that was quite personal to them as well, so they helped us design that. So, shall I leave it there and then go? How do children know they've been heard is a really interesting one. I mean, partly because you ask them again, you go back on the loop. That's why the voice and the influence. So you have to go back and check out whether that met expectations or not. And also in what happens in terms of their personal circumstances. You know, if they're talking to you about what they like or they don't like about, I don't know, let's think. We did a survey about what's it like, or a set of conversations with them about where was safe in the city centre. And that feedback was fantastic, because we're talking about a child-friendly city, and what they told us, what the younger children told us was, it's a big kids city, it's a big person city. It's not designed for little people, basically. And when we started to look at that and talk to the city planners, we've now started to try and build in, design things, more play areas, more green space in the way that the city operates, but looking at it from down here somewhere, as opposed to an adult's view of the world. So that was quite interesting. Older kids would tell us, where we thought this wasn't the case, that the bus station was a dangerous place. That's the place they felt most scared, because that's where you're waiting around, and that's when other gangs would come, and that's where the trouble started. Particularly where, you know, as the lights started to go. So doing something about the design of the bus station. Now, we wouldn't have got round to that because we thought the bus station was okay. It was looked quite neat and tidy to us, but that was somewhere that young people said they didn't feel safe. So it just brings you in, just opening up the conversations takes you into all sorts of places that you might not have even thought about, but you've got to be willing to have that conversation. You've got to be willing to listen, which was one of the things that was on the film there, and then you've got to be willing to respond. The other thing children and young people were very clear about, we don't expect you to do everything. We don't expect you to do everything. As long as you come back to us and tell us why you're not doing certain things that we've talked about, or certain things that we've asked about. We understand that, but just talk to us and keep us engaged in the dialogue. And they will remind us in various ways, including my personal email box, when we haven't. So, so it's just worth thinking about. Somebody in here, there was one here, that was what we saw. That was it. How did you get adults involved in engaging with children and young people when they had an assumption that giving them a say in decision making would make them uncontrollable and out of hand, i.e. they'll take over? Now that's I think you have to accept that fear of giving something up. You know, if you're giving up some of your traditional power, you can see it that way. But part of the whole workforce going through the restorative approach, the high support, high challenge, doing things with people, we can't not do this. We can't not engage children and young people in this particular way. And surprise, surprise, they don't ask for the world. They don't want to take over in the way that perhaps implies, or perhaps that's the way people fear. We had exactly the same response when we moved towards family group decision making. We can't give too much power to families because we know best. Well, we don't actually. Families are experts in their own child rearing practices, and we've got to access that expertise. And if you think about it this way, we're in a sports club, okay? If you look at any sports club, any sports team, the proportion of victories that sports team has is predominantly geared towards when they're playing the home game. When they play at home, you've got an increased, statistically, I can't remember what it is, but it's a high statistical likelihood that the home team will win. If you think about the orthodoxy of child protection, it's geared towards the state playing the home game. And what I mean by that is, we invite parents in to meet with a large room of professionals, predominantly. This certainly was the case in the UK. And it's the one parent, two parents if you're lucky, maybe some grandparents, but then a big table full of professionals, and we're playing the home game. Family group decision making flips that, and the professionals have to play the away game, and they play the family's home game, and it's a small number of professionals who go into a meeting with a very big group usually of family who have been doing the work to come up with their own plan. Now that is scary for the professionals in the orthodoxy, but just how scary is it if you're the family coming to the home game originally? And why shouldn't it be flipped the other way around? And that training on restorative approaches, of which family group decision making is a flagship part of that, that's where we were heading. And really now we've got to a position where social workers are saying, do you know what? This is why I came in to do this work in the first place. This is what I wanted to do in the first place, but all the rules and regulations and the guidance and the fear of getting it wrong led me this way, to do things to families or to do things for them or to do nothing at all. And now I'm in a position where I'm doing things with families. And actually, if you're a social worker, why wouldn't you want all these people there to help you? Why would you want to be sat there trying to dream up the perfect plan for that child and then go home at night and carry the risk all on your own? Why wouldn't you want to have all these people helping you?